Hands up if you were ever on the receiving end of the cane, the slipper or the tawse. In this video we're going to look at a bit of British school history and follow the long road to their eventual ban after a vote in the House of Commons came down to a single vote. Here in Scotland we called it the belt, or a few called it the strap, but whatever we called it, it was bloody sore. The tawse was a tough strip of leather with 1, 2 or sometimes 3 slits at the business end. They were also sold in various weights. I kid you not, a teacher could order a heavier weight tawse which was marketed as being more painful. If you went to school in the 1970s or the 1980s, and long before that of course, statistically you were more than likely to have felt its wrath at least once. There were other non-physical punishments of course, such as writing lines etc, but I think most guys I knew probably preferred just getting the belt rather than sitting for 2 hours in the evening writing out lines or whatever. Yes, until the latter part of the 1980s, it was still legal for teachers to hit the pupils with something or other. In England and Wales, usually the cane was used, or maybe a slipper or plimsoll. In Scotland we had the Lochgelly tawse, or tawse for short. It was, by my school days, the only instrument permitted under the 1968 Code of Practice. Although similar implements had been around for years, it was a saddler by the name of Robert Thilp from the small village of Lochgelly in Fife, Scotland, who created the iconic implement every schoolchild back then was all too familiar with. John Dick Leather Goods in Lochgelly still manufacture and sell various tawse. Their name was synonymous with the Lochgelly tawse in the 1970s. It was literally stamped into the leather, and the company is now operated by his daughter. It's mostly other leather goods they do now, but you can still buy a tawse. We never called it the tawse, maybe the older generations did, but whatever we called it, most of us got it, yours truly included. And you know what? I always deserved it. Further to that, there were no doubt occasions I didn't get belted, but would have deserved it. We all knew who could lay it, i.e. which teachers were the best at using it, usually the male teachers. When I was at school, the female teachers, some, not all, seemed more reluctant to use the belt, often sending you to a more senior male teacher to administer the punishment. You could be belted for almost any reason, and no doubt some got it for no real reason at all. There are some pretty grim cases out there, such as the headmaster who belted an 11-year-old boy 8 times in 2 hours. The headmaster was convicted by the courts, but somewhat unbelievably, one of the Scottish teaching unions spoke out against his conviction. It just goes to show how far we've come. He wasn't the only one who found himself in the dock. There are many other such cases of teaching staff dishing out abuse in the name of discipline. There were some right iffy teachers about back then, spanking teenage boys on their bare bottoms. In my memory, it was rarely used at primary schools in my time, but it was available, and it was definitely used occasionally. Some teachers at my secondary school even had names for their belt. I bet that was commonplace. For most of the 19th and early 20th century, discipline in British schools was built on the idea that pain and fear were essential tools for controlling children. Under the doctrine of in loco parentis, that's Latin for in the place of a parent, teachers were seen as standing in for parents and therefore entitled to punish physically. In Victorian and Edwardian classrooms, the cane, the strap and the ruler were completely normal, not a last resort, but an everyday part of school life. Punishment was usually in front of the class. Boys caned across the hands or buttocks in front of the class. Girls sometimes struck on the hands, younger children rapped with a ruler or made to stand in the corner. The aim wasn't just to correct behaviour, but to instill obedience, respect for authority, and frankly, fear of stepping out of line. This basic model carried on with surprisingly little change through the interwar and post-war years. The default assumption remained that corporal punishment was both necessary and morally justified. Staff were obliged to keep punishment books recording canings and beltings as a matter of routine, and many schools had formal rules about how many strokes different offences attracted. Alongside the physical punishments sat a whole hierarchy of lesser sanctions, lines, detentions, extra homework, etc., but the threat of the cane or the belt was always there. Up to the early 1960s, there was little serious official pressure to change this. Debates about discipline were mostly about how much punishment was needed, not whether hitting children in school was acceptable or not. It's only in the late 1960s, with reports like Plowden and the kids starting to take practical action, that the long process of dismantling that culture really begins. In Scotland, various surveys revealed 80% of secondary pupils were belted at least once in 1976, but this had fallen to 61% by 1982. One survey of school leavers found that only 5% of boys left school without ever getting the belt. The beltings were usually given in front of the class or in the headmaster's office or other senior staff member if you were sent there. I don't know if it was some kind of standard, but I always seemed to get 2 strokes, one on each hand with the other hand underneath. 6 of the best was supposed to be the limit, but I don't recall anyone ever getting a 6er. Seemingly Tony Blair did in his time at Fettes College. Let everyone know in the comments how many you got. I often see people on social media posts defending the belt saying, "It never done me any harm," but did it ever do anyone any good? It never seemed to change anyone's behaviour long term, at least in my experience. The road to the ban. The first sign of a change is gonna come was in 1967 with the Plowden Report. This study was a major review of primary education in England, marking one of the first official cracks in the old discipline system. While it didn't ban corporal punishment outright, it strongly questioned its value, arguing that hitting children was incompatible with the more child-centred, nurturing approach to education it was promoting. Plowden recommended that corporal punishment in primary schools should be abandoned, urging teachers to rely instead on encouragement, understanding and non-violent alternatives. The reply didn't change the law on its own, but it gave campaigners and reformers a powerful government-backed argument that the cane and the belt belonged to the past, not the modern classroom. In 1968, STOP, the Society of Teachers Opposed to Physical Punishment, was founded. This was a pressure group which campaigned for the abolition of corporal punishment in schools and other institutions in the United Kingdom. It lobbied Parliament, local education authorities and other bodies, produced surveys and wrote frequently to the press. The next major milestone came on May 17, 1972, when 10,000 school kids marched on central London. Striking from school, they headed for Trafalgar Square under No to the Cane banners, with some organisers arrested as police tried to disperse the youngsters. In the mid-1970s, 2 Scottish mothers, Grace Campbell and Jane Cossins, objected to their laddies learning under the threat of corporal punishment in school and refused to give consent. This led to a long legal battle that ended up in the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. Now you'd think the local community would be behind these mothers fighting back against the authorities. Not a bit of it. They were treated terribly. The Campbells had a teacher for a neighbour and he never spoke to them for 20 years. Again, it's well worth digging further into the stories of Mrs. Campbell and Cossins. Some shocking stuff went on there. In February 1982, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that corporal punishment in British schools was a violation of the European Convention on Human Rights when it was administered against a child's parents' wishes. Scottish authorities told schools not to belt pupils whose parents objected. Well, it was not common knowledge in our school that you could be opted out. In 1986, the Education No. 2 Bill went through Parliament. When it goes to the Lords, they add a clause calling for a full ban in all state schools. When this amended bill goes back to the Commons, there was a free vote as the subject was deemed so divisive. In July of '86, after a heated debate, the Lords clause is passed by 231 to 230. Yes, a single vote. It's worth mentioning, 13 Tories had been held up in traffic for the royal wedding of Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to Sarah Ferguson the following day, and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, known to be very much in favour of corporal punishment, also missed the crucial vote as she was entertaining Nancy Reagan before the wedding celebrations. So the bill became an Act of Parliament and the belt, cane etc. were officially outlawed in England, Wales and Scotland. This came into effect at the start of the 1987-88 school year, but I'd already left school by then. We were well behind some parts of the continent on this issue. Poland banned corporal punishment in schools in, wait for it, 1783. After this date, despite corporal punishment being banned in state schools, some independent fee-paying schools carried on using this method, now regarded by most as inhumane and barbaric. It wasn't until 1999 that all schools in England and Wales finally ended its use, with private schools in Scotland following suit in the year 2000. Northern Ireland finally completed a UK-wide ban in 2003. Some conservative Christian schools continued fighting the ban, arguing for its use on religious freedom grounds, but ultimately lost their legal battle. Well, it's been nearly 40 years since the banning, and it's very much up for debate as to whether behaviour in schools is so much better. You'll still see some terrible stuff in the media. Maybe we get a distorted picture, as lots of stuff is captured on phones nowadays. So what are your memories of the belt, cane, etc. from your school days? Are you maybe even in favour of bringing it back? Some surveys suggest half of parents still support some form of physical discipline, at least at home anyway. It would be interesting to hear from any former teachers if they ever see this video. I'll leave some links in the description for further reading on this topic. There are a couple of videos of mine on screen now which YouTube thinks you may like. If you want to watch them, that would be tickety-boo.